Hilary Bricken Canna Law Group, which is also part of Harris Moure. And Hilary's only 30, but that really doesn't mean anything in cannabis. She's been here since the beginning. So she gives us an overview of where Washington State has been and where it's going, as well as check in on other markets. Okay, so we have Hilary Bricken from Harris Moure, Canna Law. I mean, what's the name of the firm?
That is the name of the law firm. It is Harris Moure, PLLC. We're headquartered in Seattle. And what I do is I chair our regulated substances practice group. Now, regulated substances pretty much speaks for itself. It includes bar and liquor, restaurants, pharmaceuticals. It also includes cannabis. And we have opted to separately brand our cannabis practice as Canna Law Group. So I also help to oversee that for the firm.
Okay, so it is both. It is Harris Moure and it is Canna Law Group.
It is both. And we recently received our federal trademark registration for Canna Law Group. So it's an official both as of now.
Excellent. Now, when did you realize that you should do this?
It was a slow progression. Essentially what happened is that a criminal defense lawyer with a very thick book of business, mostly dedicated to the criminal defense of medical marijuana patients and those running these businesses, he came to us and said they are less concerned about enforcement and way more concerned about contracts, corporate formation, trademark, business relationships. So we'd much rather have you take it on than our criminal defense law firm take it on. And I opted to do it as a youngish associate. I thought it was a good opportunity. I like the clients. These are basically startups. So that's how I got into it. Basically, a criminal defense lawyer wanted to delegate the work.
Okay, fantastic. And thank goodness in retrospect, huh?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, some days it's tough, but most days it's great. And, he had the wisdom to know that he didn't want to do it. And lots of lawyers are having to make that decision regarding where their practice is going. So I certainly respect him for that decision.
Certainly. And I mean, you are not really... Well, I think that you're probably under 50 years old, right?
Oh, yeah. I'll go ahead and tell you. I am 30 years of age. I've been in practice for a total of 5 years. I graduated from law school in 2010. The edge I probably have is that I started doing strictly the business side of it towards late-ish 2010. So almost right out of the gate, I had pretty good litigation experience. I had really good business experience by that time. Our law firm is boutique. We get a lot of opportunity because we're not a big firm for associates to kind of step into these sorts of roles. So, 5 years in total from 2010.
And, we really didn't have too much of at least in terms of adult use, much of a legal marketplace at the time. So you really, are, with all due respect, Hilary, you're ancient for the industry.
It feels that way sometimes because it's so ever-changing and evolving, and I feel unique to be in that position. And if we look at California, we look at Washington, those states went in 96 and 98. It took that much time to develop the marketplaces we had. But yeah, I can say I was here before there was legalization.
Okay, so let's go back in time here. You were talking about Washington State. That's where you're based, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct, in Seattle.
In Seattle. Okay, great. But that's not where you're from.
No, I'm actually from Southwest Florida, born and raised.
Okay, so we have to talk a lot about this. Southwest Florida, what does that mean to people that don't know Florida?
Fort Myers, Florida. If you have an elderly grandparent or a relative, they probably reside there in the spring and then go back to their Midwest state in the summer. It's where the Red Sox train, and it is a very sleepy, quiet little town. And I'm not actually really from Fort Myers. I spent a lot of time there. I'm actually from an even smaller place called Cape Coral, which is right on the water, a small, basically little fishing town.
And it is beautiful there. And I do know personally that Fort Myers is really not a big town. And I love that that's the big town for you.
Yeah, that was the big town for me, and it speaks volumes. I definitely grew up in kind of a Mayberry by the beach setting. So coming to Seattle, and by the way, I lived in Florida for 25 years, coming to the Northwest was a bit of a culture shock. And,
Right.
I go back home and people ask me what I do, and their eyes just go wide, because that is not a possibility that they would have ever conceived of, being from the Southeast.
Well, yeah, and Southeast, as far as the country is concerned, Southwest Florida, as far as the state is concerned, and the reason that I go back to that is because that's a pretty conservative area there, right?
Oh, yeah, it's very red, and I think, ironically, the further north you go in Florida, the redder it gets, and maybe the one blue spot is the Southeast, Fort Lauderdale and Miami, and that's where I went to law school. So just with the politics across the state, it's a very complicated state because it is so diverse in many ways. But certainly the majority, overwhelmingly, are conservative Republicans, and not exactly in the middle. They're quite to the right.
Yeah. The further north you go, the further south you get.
Pretty much.
All right. So you're there. So there's Hilary Bricken as as a kid, Mayberry by the beach, right? Cape Coral. So what were you like as a kid? Were you fishing? Were you doing kind of things associated with the water? What was your deal?
Actually, no. A majority of my time I was a landlubber. I was a big soccer player, and I inevitably won a scholarship to college on athletics and academics because of that soccer history. So most of the time I was on the pitch in the sun, unfortunately without sunscreen, I have since learned. But most of my time was spent playing sports, and then balancing that with academics.
Okay, so we have to take this tangent because it is June of 2015. Our Cannabis Economy event is taking place in Vancouver, and you know what I'm getting at. We're talking about the Women's World Cup. Okay, so now we've got the U.S. versus Colombia coming up, I think on Monday. Is that right?
The 22nd, yeah.
Okay, very good. And then how are we doing? Tell us, from a soccer player's perspective, we understand that this is a tangent, but it's a must. How are we doing here as far as the soccer team?
They're strong. The last time I think a lot of people don't really realize this. The last time the women won a World Cup, I was 14 years old. It was 1999. And that was with those great 11, Mia Hamm, Michelle Akers, Brandi Chastain, Brianna Scurry in the goal. These are kind of the gods in female soccer. But I think we have a new sheriff in town. And by the way, when I was in college, my little college team at Jacksonville University played the University of Florida, and who was up top but Abby Wambach, and she is terrifyingly good. So I think that they are a very good squad. I have seen at least one of them in the flesh, and properly was pretty scared. I think they're going to do really well, and I sincerely hope that if they're going to meet Japan again, that they beat them this time.
There we go. All right, good. We like it. And then, again, to just continue down this path for just a few more moments. As far as Abby being on the pitch with you, were on the pitch with her?
I was. I was also on offense, though, so thankfully I was not defending her.
But how did you it seems like you could tell that she had just a supremely elevated talent. What was it about her?
She's an otherworld player, and she utilizes parts of her body and her brain that you really don't see commonly in women's soccer. She just knows how to move her body in a way, for example, her air game. I'm going to say it. I would say that most female soccer players don't have a fantastic air game, and using headers isn't exactly an effective way to progress in scoring, but she is the exception. She's not afraid to go all in. And then you just look at her anatomically. She's a brick wall. And I know many people have said she's lost her step, she's not as fast. And whether or not that's true, she makes up for it in a panoply of other ways. I mean, she's the reason why we beat Nigeria 1-0, even though many people were not excited for that game. They were already getting out of it. She can still pack a punch, and is somebody who should be taken very seriously.
There we go. All right, we're taking her seriously. June 22nd, let's get the thing going. I think it's a night game even, so we can all watch it.
Yeah,
well, not for you.
Not for me. They were in Vancouver the other day, but I think they're back in Edmonton. I wish we could talk about World Cup this whole podcast. That would be so fun.
Yeah, we're not gonna though. We're gonna get right back to it. But we've taken the tangent of soccer. You had mentioned that there were other athletics though, just to get to know you better. What other sports were you playing?
Just a little bit. I mean, Florida. The typical kind of profile for a kid is golf, tennis, track, any outdoor sport. So I dabbled in a little bit of that, but I ultimately had to make the choice with the sport that was going to have a future, and that was soccer. So I've been playing soccer since I was about 7 years old, really long time. Got a scholarship, played for 3.5 years in college before I finally opted off the squad because I was never going to make the U.S. women's national team, and I took a turn for law school.
Okay, that's interesting. So you were aware of your own talent, and that just is the case. There are some that are better than others.
I was more than happy to acknowledge my physical limitations and my personal interests. It was for me, soccer was a fantastic experience. It was a great means to an end, and it taught me a lot about time management and perseverance. But beyond that, I am not Abby Wambach. Clearly, I'm a much better lawyer than I am a professional soccer player.
All right. You said time management, and what was the other lesson learned?
Perseverance, not giving up.
Right.
The physical trial of the sport. I mean, just the fitness alone. If you think you can't do something in your regular life, just try to pass a fitness test for a college soccer team. Very, very difficult. And to get past that just physically really prepares you mentally for the difficulties that lay ahead in life generally, I think. And
that makes sense. In terms of time management, though, how does that come into it?
Student athlete, balancing college curriculum versus, soccer schedule. And soccer's not a short season in college. There's the active fall, and then you have spring where you're kind of training for the fall again. And then you have summer with the fitness tests and ultimately preseason. So balancing the life of the athlete, which their purpose for the school is to succeed, raise money with boosting, get the win, get the championship, get the ring, and then you got your academics and balancing those two things. I was a Spanish philosophy English major. It was challenging, and I didn't do that triple major until after I had kind of seeded from the team when I was a senior. I was able to do that because I had enough credits.
Spanish philosophy, what was the third one?
English, yeah.
English. So good. I'm glad that you know the language. But I was going to ask you, what you did focus on, and it seems like you just went back right to the books.
I did, and it was so liberating because that soccer schedule, playing for nearly 2 decades, you're kind of ready to be done. You're burned out in some ways, and I really did turn strongly to academia. And I was very fortunate with what I chose. Originally, I was political science, hated it. I didn't like the rhetoric. I really didn't like the analyses. I was way more methodical, at least personally. So I switched to philosophy, and my parents promptly tried to kill me, but relented when they realized that law schools actually like philosophy majors. And by then, I knew, I was definitely going to pursue a legal career. And by the way, this was before the economic crash. I did not shelter in law school because I couldn't do anything else. I really went because I wanted to be a lawyer. But before that, I really enjoyed the Spanish language. I studied and lived abroad in Spain, have since been back a few times. So I really did turn to academia, and I indulged in college life because I had really been denied it up until that point.
Yeah, totally. And we understand that from your description of how you came to understand time management.
Yeah.
As far as the relationship between go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just, I was putting an exclamation point on that. Sports are really good for those of us who can't manage our time more effectively.
There we go. And so there is that relationship between law school and philosophy. In other words, you understood the Socratic method before you got there, right?
I was well aware of it. Understanding it, I don't know if I'd go that far because there's nothing like being humiliated, by a Harvard-educated, completely entitled law professor. It really is a terrible and wisdom-infused experience. But I did get it at that point that in order to know it, you really have to be tested, and you can't do that unless somebody's got your feet to the fire. And even with philosophy, just the logic behind thinking, the multiple methods in which we think and how we see the world, that's very useful in the law too, when we're trying to come up with solutions for some very sticky problems.
I think I took a philosophy course, and is there a guy named Anaximander? Did I make that up to myself?
I don't know if there is or not. I mean, it's been so long. I know the marquee names, obviously Socrates, Aristotle, the few others. I don't know about that one though.
Well, you never know. So philosophy, and we're going to get to law school in actuality. But take us to Spain first. Did you go to Spain and live in Spain while you were still in school?
I did when I was a junior, and this is while I was still playing soccer. I went before my senior year. I went and lived in Sevilla for about 3 months, which is in the south of Spain. Super hot, but really true to the Spanish culture, and that they embrace the fiesta back then, or excuse me, the siesta. They even had bullfighting, which I did see. It was barbaric, in the beginning, but even in the end, you get charged up with the crowd, and they're just massive cultural differences that are super fascinating. But I spent about 3.5 months there.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about the siesta. Is completely and totally foreign to Americans. It makes no sense as far as we think that we would like to try to understand other cultures. That makes no sense, right?
It does not jibe with the workday, but certainly there it did, and it made a lot of sense because in the summer it's wildly hot, and I think most Americans who have been to Spain or at least looked at it know most of the businesses close daily from about 11 a.m. to 6 at night, or maybe even a little less than that. But it is definitely part of the culture, and to try to fight it, I think, would be unwise.
Is it to fight the heat? What is the etymology of it, from your understanding?
From my understanding, it's definitely to cope with the heat. Beyond that, I'm not really sure what the significance is. I'm sure that there is a reliable story out there. I don't personally know it, but from my understanding, I mean, you just would not see people. And a couple of times I stayed up. It would just be deserted. The businesses would close. It was very hot, and people really, I think, were trying to cope with the heat efficiently.
And for anybody that's read Ernest Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises, you're familiar with bullfighting, but for those that aren't, it is completely and totally barbaric. It is amazingly barbaric. Take us through what it was like to understand what bullfighting was in actuality.
Yeah, it's incredibly sad. And The Sun Also Rises to me was a great novel, and I thought it would be, a romantic experience and really cathartic. And it's very interesting because during the week, and Sevilla has a fantastic bullfighting ring. It's beautiful. It really, truly is. And it's not the only one in the country, but it is one of the ones that's still used. And we would go on Tuesday nights, and I only went a couple of times just to try to immerse myself in the culture. And it would be amateur night for the first maybe couple of hours. And then they'd bring in the really gifted matadors at the end of the night. And the irony of the practice is that a good matador kills cleanly and quickly after enough show. A bad matador is one that's really going to make the bull suffer because they can't get a quick kill. And that's the barbarism behind it, if you're going to do it at all. To watch the first few matadors on amateur night was very painful. I nearly left the stadium. My friends insisted on staying, and the more Dos Campos we had, I think, which obviously is their beer, it was easier to kind of contemplate and embrace what was going on. But by the end, you may find yourself actually cheering on the matador to do a quick kill because it's the honorable thing to do for the bull. And that's why it's ironic, because you're cheering the guy on mainly because you want it to be over.
Yeah. So interesting. I don't know. I guess that's how I watch boxing, maybe.
It's a very awkward dance between humanity and barbarism. And, ultimately, not being a Spaniard, I can't really have an opinion, but I do hope they eventually end the practice. But I understand the culture and why it's considered entertainment.
Good to know. And in terms of Sevilla, the Barber of Seville, that's my preferred, I guess, opera. It's one of my favorites. Did you see it while over there, I guess, is a basic question to ask?
No, didn't catch it while I was over there.
Right.
I don't know if it was playing. I did a lot of travel inter-country and out of country, and I was able, for anybody out there listening who's going to visit Spain, I fully recommend that you go to Granada and visit the Alhambra, because it's the last real vestige of really the Moors and the Muslim imprint on Spain, which is really quite unique. It's very interesting. And the further northeast you go into Segovia, you can see the Roman aqueducts that are still there, and really kind of interesting perspectives on these other empires that infiltrated and left a footprint.
Yeah. And we went to Barcelona with Cannabis Economy and got a
Yeah.
sense of how Catalonia is certainly not the rest of the country and all
That
of
is
that.
right. That is right. You better speak some Catalan if you want to get around, or at least read the road signs. Very, very beautiful city, though, and a lot of I forget who is it. Is it Dali that was the big architect painter over there, and the really unique structures like the Sagrada Familia, the big church that's there. Did you guys see that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In Barcelona, I think you're right. It's not to be confused with Madrid because that's another guy, right?
Yeah, I think that's another guy, and I can't remember if it's Gaudi or Dali. I do not remember, and that tells you how little I know.
Oh no, it's Gaudi. I mean, Gaudi definitely did the later stuff. I don't know about the church, but Gaudi is prevalent in both.
Okay,
but whatever. We could talk about Spain all day too, I guess, right? But we've got stuff to do here.
Yeah, it's true. Move me on. Move me on, Seth. Move me on.
Exactly. All right. So Socratic method, university. What was it? University of Miami.
Yeah, I went to the University of Miami, Coral Gables, Florida.
All right. And my sister, brother-in-law, niece, and nephew live there currently. Did you know what law you wanted to practice when you got there, or how much, it seemed like you wanted to be a lawyer or you wanted to get into law, but how much did you know about what you wanted to do?
I knew very little about what it meant to go to law school, and I knew even less about what it meant to actually be a practicing attorney. I had tunnel vision over my conception of what a lawyer was. I thought a lawyer was only a litigator, meaning somebody that goes into court and fights. That's how naive I was. I really did not conceptualize that there are attorneys that make their living off of contract work. I mean, I was a total bumpkin, for lack of a better word. Even with the travel to Europe, I obviously was not very enlightened about American business economy, let alone the legal economy. So what I thought I wanted to do was do international law because I had the Spanish degree. Clearly, Miami with the Cuban influence, the doorway to South America, I thought I'll do international law with a focus on South America. I've got the language skills. Conversationally, I'm very, very good. And I read and write just fine. And I got to school, and I think Miami picked me up because of that particular angle. And I think I wrote a pretty decent personal statement, showing that I had this trajectory that I wanted to follow. But I got to school, and very quickly my priorities shifted as far as what I thought I wanted to do. The basic courses in law school really help realign your brain and your ego and your humility. They will knock you down a couple of pegs, even if you're a fantastic student. It's bound to happen. This pyramid effect, I think, really helps teach you where you want to go and what you want to do. And really, throughout law school, what I ended up doing after the first year, I just tried to pick up as many courses as I could in really diverse areas, because at that point I knew, I probably wasn't actually going to do international law. It's very hard to break into if you're not completely fluent and or from the culture. They have their own complete language surrounding their own laws. And if you don't have a command over that, you're pretty behind the eight ball. So I shifted, and I thought, you know what, I'll just do general litigation, maybe personal injury. That's what a lot of people were thinking of doing. Pays well if you get a good case. And that didn't even end up happening. It was a very interesting start for me. But while I was in law school, the economy crashed, and big firms, and for the first time in a long time, it crashed super hard, especially in Florida because of the real estate bubble and the bad banking behavior. Obviously, we all don't want to revisit that, but it happened right in the middle of my law school career, right after my first year, and nobody could get jobs when they graduated, and there were way, way too many lawyers for the legal gigs that were out there. So that also helped rearrange my choices. I would have done anything at that point to have a job.
And you did. You became an intern for, I think, the U.S. Army Judge Advocate. So
that was good on you for bringing it up. That was my second summer. And the second summer in law school after the first year, this is when you are making real career choices, in my opinion. And typically, if you're going to go the big law route, if you've done well enough, they're going to pick you up for a summer associateship, and they're going to pay you actually very, very well. And typically, when you nail something like that, if you did a good job, inevitably they would make you an offer after law school. That changed with the big economic crash. Even in my second summer, big firms were not offering summer associateships, and if they were, they weren't paying very well. So I opted to apply to the JAG Corps, which if you've all seen A Few Good Men, those are JAGs. And it's the Judge Army Advocates Corps, or the General, I can't even remember what the acronym stands for anymore, but they're military lawyers. And they do all kinds of things, like defend and prosecute soldiers. They enforce the Uniform Code of Military Justice. They do rules of engagement. I mean, when we bomb people, that decision goes through JAGs. As much as it goes through Congress and all these other people and the president, it goes through lawyers too. So that's what I did. I was very fortunate because they put me in Germany, in Grafenwehr, which is by Munich in the south, in Bavaria. Very, very cool experience. And I did apply to them for a job after law school. And usually it's just like the big firm thing where if you got a JAG internship, which it's very hard to get one of those. It's extremely difficult to get one of those. And I was even surprised when I got it because everything was so uncertain at that point. I was an average law school student. I'm not afraid to admit that. At that point, I had just graduated from college. I didn't know how to study or study effectively for law school. So I was very average, and I was surprised that I got the gig. But when I did, I thought, man, if I want to be a JAG, I'll be able to do that after school because I got the internship. Well, I applied for the full JAG job. I did not get it. I was one of the few people who didn't get it. And they said to me it was because you neglected to send in letters of recommendation, which I had. They had not been received with my application. Go figure, government employment. Probably got lost in the sauce somewhere with my application. I was devastated. I was 100% devastated that I was not going to be, for example, an Army JAG lawyer, which is interesting because even JAGs have to deploy to places like Afghanistan and maybe worse. So I was really, really, really upset when I did not get that employment.
Interesting. And we will come back and talk about Germany another time.
Yes.
But that was, kind of life teaches you what you don't know. And it's always good for life to hit you in the face a little bit so that you can realize what you need to do type of thing. And it sounds like that was one of those moments.
It was, and it forced me to be more resourceful. And inevitably, what ended up happening was that, and I know we're gonna talk about my personal life. I do have a husband, and he actually was in the military, and he got stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is by Tacoma in Washington. And I made a big life decision. It was either stay in Florida and scrounge for a job, or embark on a great adventure to the West Coast and see what would happen to be with him. I opted for him.
Wow.
My mother promptly had a nervous breakdown. I'd never done anything like that before, but there was no economy, and I hadn't gotten the JAG job. So I went out to the West Coast, and after multiple interviews, many, many rejections, again, this being some of the hardest time, I think, ever to get a legal job, I got picked up by Harris Moure in a contract position. And I performed for them. I did really well for them. And they basically said, the lawyer that came, the criminal defense lawyer with the book of medical marijuana defense business, I had shown enough in my work up to that point that they said, if we're going to put this in the hands of anybody, it's going to be you. And that really solidified my position with them through the present.
So interesting. I mean, but how did you cross paths with them? The way that you just said it kind of magically appeared, right?
I mean, yeah, I wish. Well, what ended up happening is that I was on my very last legs. I was on my last legs with law. I thought, you know what? I've paid all this money to go to law school. There are no jobs to be had. I've passed the bar. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I reached out to the University of Miami and I said, do you have an alumni list of anybody that's out here? And, Miami is not Harvard, is not Yale, is up there in the top 50 of law schools, I think at this point, or is close. But it's really a regional school. It's powerful in the Southeast. It's very powerful in Miami. And I had none of that. I was not there. But they gave me the alumni list, and I started to email the lawyers on it just to see if they wanted a contract lawyer or even a law clerk. And the one that reached back out to me was Moure, of Harris Moure. Mm-hmm. He actually got his maritime degree in law from the University of Miami. And he brought me in as a contract lawyer on his maritime cases, suing cruise ships on personal injury claims. So if Grandma Ida falls on the Lido deck on a Holland America cruise, we would sue Holland America on behalf of Grandma Ida.
Okay. And it sounds like you did all right on behalf of Grandma Ida.
We did. I definitely did. And in the beginning, litigation was a lot of what I was doing. And I've been in many Holland America lawsuits as second chair or as the brief writer, taken depositions, defended depositions, gone to trial. So I made my bed there, and I was doing a little bit of business work on the side as it came in and as I was trying to train myself and get trained. And the cannabis book was just an opportunity out of the blue. I never thought I would do it. I had no intention of doing it. It just landed in my lap.
So here's this criminal defense lawyer who was with Harris Moure, or
no,
completely external?
Independent. His name is Aaron Pelly, and he is with the Pelly Law Group. He is a fantastic criminal defense lawyer. He is one of the few lawyers that knows how to market and market effectively, and he knew that his clients had these needs, but he didn't want to convert to being a business lawyer. And he needed a firm that had the resources, and not a huge firm, because a huge firm wouldn't touch it. He needed somebody like us. And really, our bread and butter at Harris Moure is niche practice areas that are really kind of emerging markets. They're scary. China is one of our big practice areas, which if you're practicing cannabis, China is probably right up your alley as far as arbitrariness, enforcement, and just terrifying circumstances between governments. China's that. And maritime. Maritime is super antiquated, and it's not easy. It's complicated stuff. There are certain standards you have to abide by. Not anybody can just do it. They would really have to learn it. And then with regulated substances, and we have other practice areas, you just see how we prioritize these emerging, scary, kind of unfounded markets as attorneys.
Amazing. So let's kind of now dive in on cannabis. And what I would love to do, if we can, as organized as possible, is try to take it year by year and how what you have been doing has changed. So 2010, okay, here we go, Hilary. You seem to know, you seem to be able to get things done. Please help out with what in 2010, right?
Okay, yes.
What was it?
All right, so in 2010, right, we have no legalization. We do not have as many states as we have now that have even medical. Medical cannabis in Washington looks like the medical cannabis industry in California now. There was very little regulation. Right. We had a statute. That's about all we had. And we had a lot of people under that statute taking advantage of the loopholes therein to create these very questionably legal businesses. And back then, we had available to us enough gaps in the law where if we got hauled into court, criminal, state criminal, or on a business dispute, we could say, hey, the statute alludes to the fact that this was the intent of the law, that this is what safe access means for patients, that we should be able to have these businesses. That world back then was based on this nonprofit model with the revolving door for patient participation with a very large amount of cannabis per collective garden. That's what we call them here. And basically, with a collective garden grow, it's up to 10 patients at any given moment. And we didn't even really analyze that in the law. At any given time, you can have 10 patients in one of these gardens. And at a max, these gardens could have up to 45 plants yielding up to 72 ounces. That's 4.5 pounds. And it didn't say, for example, qualifying like a 60-day supply. This was at any given time. So we had all of these collective gardens and their corresponding storefronts that were just pumping out cannabis like crazy. And there was an explosion of businesses in Seattle because Seattle said, look, we have this crappy statute. We have no state regulation. We are actually going to treat these like regular businesses. All you need is a business license, and we're not really going to ask anything beyond that. So we had a great explosion of medical cannabis businesses in 2010. And even then, we had very little federal intervention. We had the Ogden Memo in 2009, which for listeners who don't know what that is, basically the federal government has been communicating its position on cannabis through enforcement memoranda to its own U.S. attorneys, saying this is how we want you to treat cannabis in states that have it. Because of the federal illegality, this is how you have to prioritize. Well, David Ogden, who was a former U.S. Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, he wrote his memo in 2009, and he basically said, if you're in compliance with state law, you're less of an enforcement priority to us. We still reserve the right to enforce, but if you're in compliance with state laws, you are not going to be that big of a thorn in our side. So many people took that information and they said, hey, the federal government has green-lighted The cannabis industry, clearly. And again, leading up to this proliferation in 2010, most of that was spurred from a lack of state regulation and oversight and the Ogden memo.
And we've had John Davis from the NWPRC on, and he, at the operator level, speaks almost exactly like you do. Your laws aren't clear enough, so we are absolutely supposed to do things this way. We are following the law.
And I'm sure Davis would say it forced a lot of people into formulating their own best practices, which is why we have such a diversity of actors here in Washington state. Some people like John are really good, and they've created packaging and labeling standards that care about testing, but we have people that don't care about that at all because it's not required. So I'm sure what he said was accurate.
There you go. All right. So now that was the kind of you getting the lay of the land, and here's what we're doing, and we're ready to roll here. That's when you found that out. So 2011, how did things maybe even advance or change, or what was different?
2011 was essentially the preservation of that particular status quo, and things began to really develop on the business front. We had people doing deals all over the place, even in the combination of a nonprofit with managers instead of equity. We basically had people experimenting with trademark. They were experimenting with contracts. They were even suing cities and counties over bans, which was fascinating. Because the law was so poorly written, these cases would go on forever because nobody could really make a decision. That decision eventually was made, but it wasn't until this year, actually, where we actually saw a resolution. So in 2011, we basically had free reign. Anybody and everybody was starting collective gardens. People were passing out green cards like crazy, and we had an explosion of cannabis businesses really throughout the Western corridor. But then, right, we get another memo from a different U.S. attorney, James M. Cole, and this is the first memo. What this memo from him, and what this memo says is, look, in the Ogden memo, we really think you misunderstood us. We didn't mean it that this is a green light of some sort. In fact, what we're here to tell you now is that what we meant to emphasize was the fact that we're still going to enforce against you, even if you're in compliance with federal law. And by the way, we're putting a premium on big, big operations and their landlords and any state and local employees that license these things. So this was really scary. It was hugely scary. And what ended up happening, even though we had this kind of almost a year of huge expansion, now the federal government is starting to come in and they're starting to raid. And they're going beyond raids. They're beginning to charge people, and federal indictments are coming down. So in 2011, I think at the end of that year, and it's the only time it's ever happened to me, I had 2 clients under federal indictment, and it was because they were huge. And they were in a city that didn't want them, and they had been fighting the city, suing the city, trying to achieve change. And that city worked in tandem with the county task force, who guess what, had a DEA agent sitting on it and referred them for prosecution to the federal government. I've read those charging papers. Nowhere in it does it say they diverted product to minors or that they had guns on site. Nothing. They didn't even violate state law. It was that they were a large, large collective grow. And that sent a very strong message that the federal government was not messing around. Thankfully things have changed. But 2011, dry spell, terrible dry spell towards the end where people were really frightened. Now, having said that, I remember when the raids were happening in Seattle, late November 2011, I thought, we're going to have to kill the practice. I'm going to have to shut down this webpage. I've basically got to get out of this because the feds are now sniffing around. I got like 3 calls that day of people who wanted to start up shops. And I said, are you insane? And they said, no, less competition for me. I want in. And I knew,
there we go.
Yeah, I knew, okay, this is not as bad as I thought. The resources of the federal government will probably only go so far. And really my job was only to tell them what state law was. It wasn't to encourage them to engage in the business conduct. And I still wasn't afraid to do that. But certainly 2011 was a darker year.
Got it. And your point to them would be, as legal counsel, to if you are going to start a business, just watch your size.
Yeah, and know that you are taking a fantastic risk, and this is not like putting assets into a risky stock portfolio. This is federally illegal. I mean, we're talking felonious criminal activity on the federal level. The consequences are really severe, and still, I mean, this is so American. I don't care. I think the drug war is wrong. I see this as a business opportunity. I'm a capitalist. I see need, and I'm going to fill it. And that's really ironic when we look at the drug war. It is spurring some of our greatest American entrepreneurs in startup land. It's crazy.
We love it. It's amazing.
I love it.
Totally, right? I mean, it's the best. It really is. It's like a little revolutionary, you know. We're calling on words like revolution and prohibition, and they're facts.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's completely American. Speaking of completely American, the year of the vote, 2012.
This was such a fun time. It was such a fun time because there was serious question over whether or not legalization was even going to pass here, which is shocking because, you know, we're Seattle. It's the bubble. You know, the birthplace of grunge, Jimi Hendrix. You know, we're very liberal. And most people who don't know Washington probably don't know that east of our mountains, east of the Cascades, is red country, red farmer conservative land. So the initiative did pass. The campaign to get it passed was so very heated. Even then, medical marijuana was saying, we don't want this on the whole. We do not want this form of legalization. This is not good for us. It's going to wipe out medical. We don't like it. But the majority of Washingtonians disagreed, and I will never forget it. I'm sitting on my couch in my apartment in First Hill, and the results came in, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to change the world.
And it has.
Yeah.
So as far as getting going, though, I think everybody can agree that Colorado kind of beat you guys to the punch in terms of stores open January 1st.
Yeah.
You guys kind of took a little bit until July.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about the state of your industry versus other states. But talk about 2013 and what happened in the beginning of the year and, you know, July and then the rest of the year.
2013 is by far the best, most exciting year I think we've ever had in the cannabis practice, just on morale's sake, because we finally got something we could work with. We had real standards, real regulation. You could be for profit. It was about profit. It was about business development. And that made us and our clients very happy because there's actually a lot of flexibility there, despite the regulation. I mean, now the sky's the limit over what can be accomplished here. And the thing between us and Colorado's had regulations since 2010. We had nothing. So we basically had to create it from scratch. And I think we've done a decent job given that that's the case. All these other states like Illinois and Nevada, they've got regulation. They're going to move really quick, just like Colorado did, which is great. We are more like California, where they're kind of creating it from the bottom up. But back to 2013, huge expansion. Everybody wants a license. We're floating through the red tape with the Liquor Control Board. You know, we got our first licensed storefront right after stores opened in July, and I felt so relieved because we had accomplished getting somebody from nothing to full-blown open with inventory, and it was such a great feeling of satisfaction that we had done that as a firm and helped our client get to that place. And, of course, the issues with banking, taxation, you know, equal access on the federal level for almost anything and everything, those issues were still there. But we were finally gaining respect for our clientele on the ground, where the biggest accomplishment was that now this industry was being taken dead seriously by a licensing agency. And that was really fantastic because when you get that level of respect, it creates a world that you just didn't have access to before with medical, where there's real skin in the game, there's real capital, there's real liquidity, and people are creating fantastic brands. They are really looking at their products and thinking about consumer protection. I mean, this is where it becomes a real industry, a tested industry, and that was 2013. It was the strengthening of the industry as a whole, even with little Washington and Colorado leading the way. I mean, they completely busted it open for everybody else.
Without question. In terms of the way to market, though, let's talk through the licensing that happened in Washington in terms of the auction. I think that most folks have come to realize that maybe that wasn't the best way forward. What are your thoughts?
People were not happy about it, and I can see why. A blind lotto, while literally fair, will always feel unfair, and many people wanted a merit-based application system. I think the LCB... First of all, the statute itself said that it had to be by a lotto, and they couldn't change it. We can't change our initiatives here in Washington unless and until 2 years have expired since its passage. So they were stuck with a lottery. And really what it was if there were too many retailers, and this was just for retail, by the way, it wasn't for production and processing, too many retailers in a given space, then we got to go for a blind lotto. What was pissing people off was that people were getting into the lottery that may not have actually been entitled to be in the lotto for the very reason that they didn't have all their ducks in a row. And just for example, the Liquor Control Board mandated that in order to make it to the lottery, you had to have proof that you had access to real property. You had to show that you had a right to it. And that could either be through a letter of intent or a leasehold. Well, very easy to obtain a letter of intent for a given property. That is not a lease. It's not as powerful. They're typically very flexible and they're limited on time. And a lot of these people that got letters of intent to show their right to the real property really had no intention of actually ever renting or owning that particular space. And for the people that did have those intentions that didn't make the lottery cut, they were very angry that that had happened, or if they didn't win the lotto in that jurisdiction because it had been pumped up with so many people that had these letters of intent, they were very angry. And I think if the Liquor Control Board could do it again, and they've been sued on it, they've been challenged, and it has not been overturned because the Liquor Cannabis Board, that's what it's called now, they have a ton of discretion in this area. And if they want to do a lotto, very, very difficult to overturn that if they can provide reason and logic as to why they opted to do that. At least that's what administrative law says. So I think if they could do it again, they may want to create higher barriers to entry with, substantiable documentation that if you say you're going to rent in a place, it's actually that place, because they weren't doing that before. So they could change it, but I think that they'll stick with the lottery. That hasn't been changed in the statute yet or in the rules.
Interesting. And you bring up the rules again, and you had said a couple of times that there were no regulations. And so we were kind of starting from scratch. And the analogy that has been told to us a few times is that over the past couple of years, 2014, 2015, you guys in Washington are kind of flying the plane while you're still building it.
Exactly.
How do you take that?
It's true. I don't disagree with that. And that is the game of regulation. Regulations are always changing in all of these heavily regulated areas, even in liquor. The rules are always changing. The thing is, with other industries, most of those rules are well established and they're tested and they've worked, and nobody in the industry wants to change them. Regulators don't want to change them. We are literally experimenting on a case-by-case basis with our rules. Just ask anybody who makes edibles. That has gone back and forth so many times, it would make your head spin. But the state is forced to do that in a way because we don't know what works yet. And we're so brand new. I mean, we haven't even been open yet for a year. It'll be a year this July. So I would agree that analogy is completely appropriate.
Amazing. So, that's where we are as far as Washington is concerned. And most lawyers, Hilary, as you well know, only practice law in one state. Sure, they advise and they can exist in other states, but they don't practice law in multiple states, because it's such a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
But you, ma'am, you practice in Washington, you practice in Florida, and you practice in California. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I have practiced in all three of those states, and it is just as painful as it sounds. It is. It is, because they're all...
Why do you do this to yourself?
I don't know. I think I'm just a masochist in so many ways. And the truth is, do I expect to be an expert in all of those states? God, no. Not at all. But I want to have the opportunity to be that. And I can't be that unless I have the license. And I don't dabble unless I think it's something I'm going to seriously undertake. And those three states each treat cannabis so differently that I definitely go in with a team when I do practice. Washington, I know the best. I live here. It's HQ. I do travel a lot. I know California very well. Florida's just getting up and going. Super limited program. But, anybody that's listening out there that's a solo or at a small firm, do not go it alone. Even if you're as crazy as me and you want to have multiple licenses, go with the team and go with boots on the ground.
Fair enough. And that advice to others is appreciated, Hilary. But you did mention the three states are very different. I guess California and Florida are similar in that they both rejected, they both had rejections. Give us the lay of the land in California and then Florida, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine. So in California, we still have Prop 215. We're still operating under that portion of the Health and Safety Code, which essentially is this kind of unregulated, no state oversight mechanism by which patients access medicine. That particular regime is really controlled by these nonprofit, sometimes statutory cooperative, but most often nonprofit mutual benefit associations, and by that I mean the dispensaries. This is how patients access cannabis in California. We had a problematic case come down about municipal control, and essentially what that case said was if municipalities want to opt out of having cannabis at all, they're free to do that. So in California, we have a patchwork quilt where regulation, quote unquote, is not coming from the state. It's coming from the cities and the counties that are opting to have cannabis. For example, LA and San Francisco, completely two different regimes when we talk about how to regulate cannabis businesses, or entities, I should say, in California. But in California, very loosey-goosey models where there is no patient registry. It's voluntary if it does exist on the county level. They do have a voluntary patient registry on the state level. Nobody uses it. There's no traceability requirements. There's no way to know where this cannabis is actually coming from. And also there's no quality assurance testing requirements. So California, to me, is Washington 5 years ago. Unregulated, kind of free-for-all with some guidelines, but no real standards on which to rely as far as consumer protection goes or business regulation. Having said that, California has a booming cannabis economy, and there's tremendous opportunity there for people who are not risk-averse. As far as Florida goes, Florida has a very limited medical marijuana program. It's referred to as the Charlotte's Web Law. It was passed in 2014, and it's a very limited law, and that only really, and I don't want to paraphrase the statute, but essentially you've got terminally ill cancer patients and children with severe seizures that can access high CBD, low THC cannabis strains only. That is it. It's not a full-blown medical cannabis program. And in addition, there are only 5 dispensing organizations, and all 5 of those organizations must grow it, manufacture it, and distribute it. And the caveat here is that it can't just be anybody. Those 5 dispensing organizations have to be 5 nurseries that have been in business in the state of Florida as a nursery, licensed by the Department of Agriculture for no less than the past 30 years. Pretty tall order.
Yeah, indeed. And we've interviewed Tim McGraw from Revolution, who found that out and then, kind of bought a nursery.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's been a lot of that acquisition down there. It's been very interesting. And we actually challenged the rules for Charlotte's Web, the regulations, because we thought that they were very friendly to big nurseries and not the little guys. We did not win. Those regulations have been passed as written, and their application window, I think, is currently open, and I believe it opened yesterday.
Interesting. Okay, and then what is the timeline, do you think? If this is now, what is, where are we going in Florida?
Oh, my gosh. Well, Amendment 2 failed, and, you were talking about both states have had rejection. California, Prop 19 failed. In Florida, Amendment 2 failed. Amendment 2 would have given us full-blown medical marijuana. John Morgan, who was behind that campaign, he's a lawyer in Orlando, trial attorney. He tried to convene in the legislature this year a bill that would have legalized medical marijuana. That did not pass. I think that Florida is probably looking at getting another initiative together for medical cannabis, probably in 2016. And I do not know what the merits will be, because in Florida, it will be a constitutional amendment, which means they have to get 60% of the voters to vote in its favor. And it nearly passed with Amendment 2. I think they had about 57%, so they're close. It could go in 2016, it might not.
Yeah, and we've spoken to others about the fact that cannabis consistently gets more votes than Democrats and or Republicans. So it doesn't really matter what kind of state it is.
No. And it may actually be the perfect bipartisan issue if you do not believe in the drug war and you'd much rather see it regulated and taxed. So we'll see.
All right. So, we could keep going for hours, Hilary, but we're up at the end here, and I hope to do this again with you down the line. But there are 2 final questions, okay. And we try to ask everybody these questions. And for you might not be able to separate them, but let's try. One is, what has most surprised you in cannabis? And the final question is, what has most surprised you in life? Now, for most people, you're not old. But first things first, what has most surprised you in cannabis?
My goodness, that is quite the question. I think, oh my gosh, that's really tough. Well, I think what has most surprised me is the level of perseverance of people to keep going, even in the darkest of hours where the federal government is breathing down our necks. It's wildly unfair and oftentimes not that profitable to be in the industry. And people really believe in change, and they think that the war on drugs is wrong. And they look at the history of it, and they even more so think it's wrong and politically motivated. So the perseverance of people, whether it's an activist, a consumer, a business, uniformly have really surprised me, because there are some points where I want to throw in the towel and say, this is impossible. I mean, this is impossible. This will take a lifetime to figure out. And the patience of those people, the enduring attitudes of those people, and the never give up kind of message that they've been able to send out over the years has just really surprised me and inspired me. Because there are moments where things get really dark and you wonder if this is going to succeed, but you just keep going. And this industry has that attitude through and through.
Absolutely. And what I love about the number of different types of people that we've spoken to is that no one has the same background. There is not the same type of person through and through here. This is literally every kind of person is in the cannabis industry. It's very interesting.
It's very true. Yeah, and that is even more mind-boggling when we talk about how they've stuck it out and how they're sticking it out. It really, truly is an American industry. Even if you hate cannabis, you cannot deny this is a very American thing to do.
Love it or leave it, baby.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. So what, can you separate this? Is there what has most surprised you in life yet as at 30 years old? You know what I mean? Taking that with a grain of salt.
Well, what's surprising me right now is the prices of homes in Seattle because of all the Silicon Valley techies coming up, but that's a terrible answer. As far as what surprised me, here we go. This is what surprised me. Despite my age, I have been able to make huge strides in this industry, and that has surprised me. And it has changed my outlook on life, that there are no barriers unless you want there to be. And there's tremendous opportunity and being able to take it. But what has surprised me is that my age has not come into play as something that doesn't serve me well in this industry, because people like a nimble, young, all-in person, and this is an area for young people. We have the bandwidth, we have the energy, we have the desire, and that to me has been really kind of a saving grace. Most 30-year-olds at this point in their practice are not doing half of what I'm doing, and I feel extremely fortunate to be in that position.
Absolutely. And just your knowledge and the experience that you have in any other industry, you'd be 65 years old.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it feels sometimes. And I'm so grateful for that level of exhaustion, because it's so very unique and has made me a better practitioner, in addition probably to a better person over its life.
You just sound like a person that... you're just not giving up. You said earlier that some days I want to give up. I don't believe, there's only one thing I don't believe from this hour that we just discussed. I don't believe that for a second.
And I don't think I believe it either. I think I get tired. I get tired of the hypocrisy of the feds and of the convolution of some of what our clients have to go through. Would I ever give it up? Not a chance, ever.
There we go. Hilary Bricken, thanks so much for the time. There you have it, Hilary Bricken. And we got a chance to talk about Spain. We got a chance to talk about opera. We got a chance to talk about bullfighting. We got a chance to talk about Hemingway. We got a chance to talk about the Socratic method of law school and, Socrates himself. So enjoyable.